Emma Rodriguez was 27 years old when her mother uttered those words that would echo in her mind for months to come. She was sitting in the small kitchen of the house where she grew up in San Antonio, Texas, having coffee with the woman who had raised her alone after her father died in a work accident when Emma was just 10 years old. The conversation began casually, talking about the weather and the neighbors, but quickly took the turn Emma dreaded every time she returned home. "You're wasting your life, Emma," her mother said, gripping the cup with both hands as if she needed something to support herself. 6 years in the Navy, and what do you have to show for it? No serious relationship, no home of your own, living from base to base as if you have no roots. When are you finally going to settle down and live a real life? Emma felt that familiar tightness in her chest, that feeling of eternally disappointing the only person who should understand her. She looked at her mother's calloused hands, at the gray hairs that had multiplied in recent years, and chose not to respond the anger that simmered inside. Instead, she simply said she needed to return to base in Norfolk earlier than planned and left the house where she no longer felt welcome. In the Navy, Emma had found something her mother could never understand. It wasn't just a job or a way to pay the bills. It was a purpose, an identity, a place where her skills were not only recognized, but essential. She was a tactical communications operator, specializing in radar systems and threat identification, with a natural talent for discerning patterns where others saw only noise. Her call sign was Cypher, a reference to her almost supernatural ability to decipher confusing signals and find meaning where there seemed to be none. But to her mother, all of this was just an excuse to avoid real life. To her, a real life meant marriage, children, a house with a white picket fence, and Sunday dinners. It meant stability and predictability, two things Emma had deliberately chosen to leave behind when she enlisted at 21, against all her mother's advice and pleas. Back at the naval base in Norfolk, Emma threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, as if each hour spent with monitors and radio frequencies was a silent response to her mother's accusation. She worked double shifts, volunteered for the most complex missions, and studied technical manuals late into the night. In a small room in the barracks, her colleagues began to joke about her merging with the chair in the communications room, but there was an underlying respect in these jokes. Everyone knew that when something critical arose, when a situation demanded the best, it was Cypher who answered the call. It was on an October night, as autumn began to bring cold winds from the Atlantic, that everything changed. Emma was on duty at the Tactical Command Center, monitoring routine communications for an operation in the Mediterranean when she picked up something strange. It was just a small deviation from normal patterns, interference that most would have dismissed as atmospheric noise or a technical glitch. But Emma had learned to trust her instincts, that inner voice that whispered when something wasn't right. She isolated the signal and began working on it, applying filters and analysis techniques she had perfected over the years. What she discovered chilled her blood. It was a coded communication pattern, definitely intentional, coming from an area where there shouldn't be any hostile activity. She immediately alerted her superior, Commander Peterson, a 25-year veteran who had seen it all, but who was still visibly worried when Emma showed him her finding. In the following hours, what Emma had detected turned out to be the prelude to a coordinated terrorist operation targeting American targets in the region. Thanks to her early warning, forces on the ground were able to reposition and thwart the attack before it could be executed. Lives were saved, strategic resources protected, and all because a communications operator in Norfolk decided to investigate a signal that seemed slightly off. News of Emma's discovery spread rapidly through the chain of command. She received formal commendations, a medal for meritorious service, and suddenly found herself being mentioned in high-level meetings as an example of operational excellence. But for Emma, the real reward came from something much simpler and deeper: the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she should be doing. Months later, Emma was selected for a special mission. The Navy was establishing a new monitoring facility in a remote location, and they needed someone with her specific skills to lead the communication. It was a significant career opportunity, but it also meant more time away from home, further away from the life her mother insisted she should be living. When Emma called to share the news, her mother's response was predictable. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by a heavy sigh that Emma knew so well. "So you're going to be away even longer," her mother said, her voice heavy with resignation and sadness. "Emma, how long are you going to keep running away? How long are you going to use that uniform as an excuse not to truly live?" Emma felt the words like a physical blow, but this time, instead of just accepting it and walking away, she decided to try to explain. "Mom, I'm not running away from anything. I'm moving towards something. I know it's hard for you to understand, but what I do matters. I make a difference. I save lives. This isn't wasting my life, it's giving it purpose." Purpose, her mother repeated the word bitterly. "Your father also talked about purpose. He worked 18 hours a day in that factory, saying he had a purpose, that he was building something. And where did that get him? He left me a widow at 35, and you without a father. Is that what you want? To die alone somewhere far away, with no one who really cares?" The conversation ended like so many others, with both frustrated and misunderstood, each convinced she was right and that the other simply couldn't see the obvious truth. Emma hung up the phone, feeling a familiar weight in her chest, that toxic mix of guilt and anger that always followed her after these conversations. The new facility was located in an arid and isolated region, a place where the sky was so vast that it seemed possible to see the curvature of the earth. The team was small, just 23 people responsible for monitoring communications in an area of critical strategic importance. Emma threw herself into the work of establishing the systems, training her team, creating protocols and procedures. She worked from before dawn until well after sunset, finding in that exhausting routine a way to silence the doubts that her mother's voice had planted in her mind. It was during her third week at the new base that the incident that would change everything occurred. Emma was on the night shift, monitoring communication channels while most of the base slept. It was a quiet night, with no unusual activity, and she was reviewing reports when she heard a sound that made every muscle in her body instantly tense. It was a weak, broken distress signal coming from a frequency that wasn't normally actively monitored. Emma quickly isolated the signal and began working to clear it. What she heard made her heart race. It was a special operations team, trapped in hostile territory under heavy fire, with multiple wounded and no possibility of immediate extraction. They had lost contact with their command and were desperately trying to reach any friendly station that might hear their distress call. Without hesitation, Emma responded using her call sign. "Cypher here. We received your signal. Hold. Position. We are working on coordinating support." Her voice was calm and firm, in stark contrast to the chaos she could hear on the other end. What she didn't tell that desperate team was that the base where she was stationed had no direct authority to order a rescue mission. She would need to coordinate with multiple commands, obtain approvals, navigate military bureaucracy, all while those men and women fought for their lives. Emma activated the emergency protocol, waking her commander, and initiating a chain of communications that would eventually reach the highest levels of command. But she knew the process would take time that this trapped team didn't have. So while official procedures ran their course, Emma did something that was technically beyond her authority. She began coordinating directly with nearby units, using her credibility and reputation to mobilize resources even before formal approval was obtained. For 4 hours and 37 minutes, Emma was the only lifeline for that team. She maintained constant communication, providing updated coordinates to the rescue forces she was orchestrating, offering tactical instructions based on her analysis of the enemy communication patterns she was intercepting, and perhaps most importantly, providing the calm and confident voice that kept those soldiers focused and hopeful even when the situation seemed impossible. When the rescue helicopter finally reached the team and all 9 members were extracted alive, There was a moment of absolute silence in all the command stations that had been monitoring the situation. And then, through all the channels, from the base command to the highest echelons in the Pentagon, came a simple but meaningful transmission. "Good job, Cypher." Emma sat at her station, trembling slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. And for the first time in months, she didn't think about her mother's words. Instead, she thought about the 9 soldiers who would be returning to their families because she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what only she could do. The following days were a whirlwind of reports, debriefings, and formal acknowledgments. The commander of the rescued team made a point of traveling to Emma's remote base to thank her personally. He was a huge man, with scars that told stories of countless dangerous missions. And when he reached out to Emma, his eyes were moist. "You saved us," he said simply. "Each of us has people waiting at home, children who will grow up with their parents, because you were there. I don't know how to thank you for that." Emma simply shook her hand and said she was doing her job. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. She finally understood, on a visceral and undeniable level, the true weight and meaning of what she did. It wasn't about sophisticated equipment or advanced techniques. It was about real lives, real families who would remain whole because she had chosen this path. When the story of the rescue eventually reached the military media, the callsign Cypher became known far beyond usual circles. Emma received a second, much more significant commendation and was invited to speak at conferences and training events. But the recognition that mattered most to her came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the rescue, Emma received a letter. It was handwritten on plain paper and came from a woman in Idaho she had never met. The letter began, "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and my husband was among the 9 men you saved that night. He told me about you, about your calm voice when all seemed lost, about how you never seemed to doubt that you could bring them back. I want you to know that because of you, my 3 daughters still have a father. Because of you, I still have my husband. Because of you, our family is complete. You didn't waste a single second of your life. Every choice you made, every sacrifice led you to be exactly where you needed to be. That night, thank you doesn't seem enough, but it's all I have to offer." Emma read the letter 3 times, tears streaming freely down her face, before finally picking it up and doing something she had been putting off for months. She called her mother. When the woman answered, Emma didn't wait for the inevitable conversation about when she would return home or when she would finally leave the Navy. Instead, she said, "Mom, I need you to listen to something. Really listen without interrupting." And then, for the first time, Emma told her mother everything. She told her about the night she detected the planned attack, about the lives that were saved because she trusted her instinct. She told her about the rescued team, about the commander with teary eyes, about the letter from his wife in Idaho. She told her about what it meant to be Cypher, about how each day of training, each hour of studying, each personal sacrifice had built up to that moment when she was the only person who could make the difference between life and death for 9 families. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Emma could almost hear her mother processing everything, and for the first time, she didn't try to fill the silence with justifications or excuses. She simply waited. Finally, her mother spoke, and her voice was different, softer, laden with something Emma couldn't immediately identify. "Emma, I never knew. You never told me these things. I thought you were just sitting in front of computers listening to the radio. I didn't understand that you were saving lives." "I tried to tell you, Mom," Emma replied, her own voice breaking. "But you never wanted to listen. You had already decided that I was wasting my life, that I was running away, that I should be doing something different." Her mother sighed, a long, tired sound. "You're right. I was afraid, Emma. Afraid of losing you like I lost your father. Afraid that you were throwing your life away on something dangerous and meaningless. But I was wrong. I see that now. What you're doing isn't a waste. It's quite the opposite." In the following months, the relationship between Emma and her mother began to change, slowly and sometimes painfully, but fundamentally. Her mother began asking questions about Emma's work reel. Interested questions, not just veiled criticism. She kept articles that mentioned Cypher, although Emma's real name was never used publicly. She began telling friends that her daughter was serving in the Navy with distinction. And there was genuine pride in her voice when she spoke about it. Emma continued her work with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew there would be more long nights, more critical missions, more moments when she would be the difference between success and disaster. And now, for the first time since enlisting, she didn't carry the weight of her mother's disapproval in every decision she made. At the base, Emma became not only an exceptional operator but also a mentor. Young recruits sought her guidance, wanting to learn not only technical skills, but also how to develop that intuition, that ability to see patterns and trust their instincts. She generously shared her experiences, always emphasizing that technical excellence was only part of the equation. The rest was dedication, persistence, and the willingness to be fully present in every moment. A year after the rescue, Emma was promoted and offered a transfer to a training position in Norfolk, where she could help shape the next generation of communications operators. It was a prestigious position, but it also meant leaving the direct operational work she loved so much. She thought long and hard about the decision, weighing not only the impact on her career, but also what it would mean for the people who depended on skills like hers. In the end, she accepted the position, recognizing that she could multiply her impact by training others. But she maintained one condition: she wanted to remain qualified and available for critical operational. If a situation arose that required her specific skills, she wanted to be ready to respond. During her promotion ceremony, with high-ranking officers in attendance and her mother sitting in the front row with tears of pride in her eyes, the commanding officer presiding over the ceremony recounted the story of the rescue. He described how a single operator working from a remote base during a night shift had become the lifeline for 9 surrounded soldiers. He explained how she had gone beyond her technical responsibilities, coordinating resources and keeping hope alive through hours of crises. And then he said something that made the entire base fall silent. There are people who do their job, and there are people who become their job. Operator Rodriguez doesn't just operate communication. She is the communication. She is the bridge between danger and salvation, between chaos and order, between despair and hope. When you hear the call sign cipher, you know someone is on your side, someone who won't give up, someone who will bring you back. When Emma looked at her mother after the ceremony, she saw something she had never seen before: total and unconditional understanding. Her mother hugged her and whispered in her ear, "I was wrong, my daughter. You are not wasting your life. You are saving lives, and I couldn't be prouder." Emma Rodriguez continued serving in the Navy, eventually achieving significant leadership positions and influencing countless operators through her training programs. But no matter how far her career took her, she never forgot that night at a remote base, when 9 lives hung in the balance, and she was the only voice between them and the abyss. That night had proven something she had always known in her heart, but that her mother had taken years to understand. Some people don't waste their lives in uniforms and distant military bases. Some people find their lives there, find their purpose, and through that purpose, make the world a safer place for everyone else. Emma remained in Norfolk for 3 years, transforming the communications operator training program into something that became a benchmark throughout the Navy. She not only taught the technical skills needed to operate increasingly complex systems, but also cultivated in those young recruits something that could not be found in any manual: the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, to trust their instincts when the data was ambiguous, and to understand that behind every signal, every frequency, every transmission, there were real lives depending on their decision. Her teaching methods were unconventional. Instead of simply presenting predictable, simulated scenarios, Emma created chaotic and impossible situations, throwing multiple simultaneous crises at her students and forcing them to prioritize, adapt, and improvise. Many initially complained that it was too difficult, too stressful, too far from standard procedures. But when these same students found themselves in real combat or emergency situations, they invariably sent messages of gratitude, acknowledging that Emma's brutal training had prepared them for reality in a way that no other instructor had managed to. During this period, her relationship with her mother continued to evolve in ways Emma never would have imagined possible. her mother began learning about military technology, reading articles and watching documentaries, not because she had any particular interest in the subject, but because it was a way to understand her daughter's world. She began to comprehend the sacrifices Emma and her colleagues made, the long hours, the constant stress, the overwhelming responsibility of knowing that a mistake could cost lives. On one particularly memorable visit, her mother spent a week in Norfolk, and Emma managed to get permission to show her some of the facilities where she worked. Obviously, there were strict limits on what could be shared, but even the little Emma was able to show impressed her mother. She saw the control room where Emma spent so many hours, observed the complexity of the systems, and met some of her colleagues who spoke of Emma with genuine reverence and respect. On the last day of that visit, they were walking along the pier, watching the anchored ships gently rocking in the water, when her mother stopped and looked directly at Emma. There were tears in her eyes, but for the first time, they weren't tears of worry or frustration. They were tears of recognition, of someone who finally saw clearly something that had been obscured by years of fear and misunderstanding. "I spent years trying to make you fit the mold I had in my head of what your life should be," your mother said, her voice breaking slightly. "A safe, predictable life like the one I knew. But you built something much bigger than I could have imagined. You found something. Most people spend their whole lives searching for and never find a place where you completely belong, where your unique abilities make a real and measurable difference. I'm so sorry it took me so long to see that." Emma hugged her mother there on the dock, with the smell of salt in the air and the sound of seagulls in the background, and felt something inside her finally. It wasn't that the harsh words of the past were erased or forgotten, but they had lost their power to hurt her. Mother had made the journey to understanding, and that meant more to Emma than any award or promotion ever could. The following years brought new challenges and opportunities. Emma was deployed on a joint international mission, working with Allied forces on collaborative intelligence operations. It was a transformative experience, exposing her to different operational philosophies, different technology, and different perspectives on what it meant to serve. She discovered that the fundamental principles that guided her translated perfectly across cultural and linguistic barriers: competence, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. During this mission, Emma met Marcus Chun, an Air Force officer working in intelligence analysis systems. They met at a particularly tense coordination meeting where multiple agencies were trying to integrate their operations, and the frustration in the air was palpable. Emma had presented an analysis that contradicted the established consensus, and Marcus was the only other person in the room who immediately saw the merit in her perspective. They ended up spending hours after that meeting comparing data and methodologies, and discovered not only that they worked exceptionally well together, but that they shared a similar vision of what really mattered in their work. The relationship that developed between them was unlike anything Emma had experienced before. Marcus not only understood the demands of her career, he lived with similar demands. He didn't ask her to choose between him and her work because he knew it wasn't a fair or necessary choice. They built something that worked within the parameters of their lives: separate assignments, communication through secure channels when possible, brief but intense encounters when their schedules allowed. When Emma finally told her mother about Marcus, she was prepared for concerns about the impracticality of the relationship, about how difficult it would be to build something lasting with someone who lived such an unstable life as hers. But her mother surprised her again. "You found someone who sees who you really are and loves exactly that," she said with a smile. "That's rare and precious, no matter what form it takes. Hold on to that, Emma." Emma's career continued to ascend. At 34, she was promoted to a significant leadership position, overseeing communications operations for an entire operational region. It was a position that combined high-level strategic work with direct operational supervision, and she loved every challenging aspect of it. She now had a say in decisions affecting hundreds of operators and countless missions, but she never lost touch with the work at the grassroots level. She still took occasional shifts at monitoring, keeping her skills sharp, and reminding herself what was at stake in every decision she made. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that Emma faced perhaps her greatest professional challenge. A complex multi-agency operation was underway, coordinating land, naval, and air forces in a high-risk rescue mission. Emma was monitoring communications when she detected a problem that no one else had noticed. Two different elements of the operation were using frequencies that, due to unusual atmospheric conditions, were interfering with each other in subtle but potentially catastrophic ways. Orders were not being received with complete clarity, and the window for correction was measured in minutes, not hours. Emma immediately initiated emergency, but quickly realized that resolving the problem through normal channels would take too long. So she did something audacious. Using her authority and reputation, she issued a direct order for all units to switch to alternate frequency, essentially taking tactical control of the situation without prior formal approval. It was a career-ending decision if she was wrong, but she knew deep down she was right. In the following 15 minutes, Emma personally coordinated the transition of all units to the new frequency, maintained operational continuity during the changeover, and ensured that the mission continued without critical interruption. When everything was resolved and the operation was successfully completed, she sent a full report explaining her actions and prepared for the consequences. The consequences came, but not in the way she expected. Instead of reprimand, she received recognition. The operations commanding officer, after reviewing all the data, concluded that the interference Emma had detected would almost certainly have resulted in a communication breakdown at a critical moment, potentially jeopardizing the entire mission and putting dozens of lives at risk. Her decision to act decisively, even without formal approval, was considered not only justified but exemplary. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. One of the pilots involved in the mission, who had been in direct communication during those critical 15 minutes, sought out Emma after. He explained that he had noticed intermittent problems receiving orders, but had attributed them to routine technical glitches. When Emma had taken over and ordered the frequency change, he had initially been confused, but the sudden and absolute clarity of communications after the change had been unmistakable. "You saved that mission," he said bluntly, "and probably saved some of our lives in the process. Thank you, Cypher." That moment crystallized for Emma something she had been gradually realizing over the years. She was no longer just doing a job or even pursuing a career. She'd become part of something bigger, an interconnected network of dedicated professionals, each bringing their unique skills to protect and serve. Her call sign was not just a technical identifier. It was a symbol of reliability, competence, and unwavering commitment to the mission. Emma continued serving, each year bringing new responsibilities and new challenges. She married Marcus in a small but meaningful ceremony, with her mother in the front row, smiling through happy tears. They built a life that worked for them, not despite their demanding careers, but by incorporating those careers into something bigger and richer. They bought a house, not because it was expected of them, but because they wanted a place that was theirs, a safe haven between deployments and missions. Her mother, now in her 70s, became one of Emma's biggest supporters, frequently sharing stories with pride about her daughter serving in the Navy. She had learned to see the value not only in conventional and predictable lives, but in lives lived with purpose and passion, even when that purpose led down unconventional paths. Emma looked back on her journey and saw not a straight and simple path, but a series of choices, each building upon the previous one, each refining her understanding of who she was and what she could offer the world. Her mother's words, those that had once hurt so much, now served as reminders of how far they had both come in their understanding of each other. She wasn't wasting her life. She was living her life fully, authentically, in a way that honored her abilities and served something greater than herself, she herself. And in that truth, she found not only professional satisfaction, but profound peace.